This will mark the last lesson for this term. Next week, you begin your third term e-learning exam, after which we will now plan of what to do next. Now look at this picture carefully. It's not nice to see. It represents the brain, the human brain, with distraction of the membrane covering the brain. So my question is, what disease is characterized by the inflammation of the protective membrane covering the brain and spinal cord? All right, the answer is meningitis. Meningitis. Or cerebrospinal meningitis. Good. In our previous lesson on our diseases, we learned about eczema, causes of eczema, and how to prevent eczema. Today, on our diseases, at the end of the lesson, I expect you to know the meaning, causes, and prevention of meningitis. Good. Now, before we define meningitis, the word meningitis is taken from two words. One is menin, meaning membrane, and itis, meaning inflammation or the swelling. So meningitis is an infectious disease, meaning that it can be transferred from one person to another, in which there is inflammation, the swelling of protective membrane covering the brain and spinal cord. Now, because it mostly affects the membrane covering the brain and the spinal cord, it is also known as cerebrospinal meningitis. Cerebrospinal meningitis. That's CSM. Take note of that. Now, what is the cause of this deadly disease? 1, bacterium. 2, can be caused by virus. C, fungus. And D, protozoa. For example, the Plasmodium parasite that causes malaria can also cause meningitis. All right. What is the method of spread or the mode of transmission? In other words, how do we get into contact with the microorganisms that cause meningitis? A, fecal contamination. When you have contamination with the feces containing any of the above organisms, bacterium, virus, fungus, protozoa, you can get the effects of meningitis. 2, droplet infection, that is through air, by having close contacts with the infected person, especially through deep kissing, sneezing, coughing. So these are the ways we get the disease. Now, before we move on, which Africa region is it common in? It is common in the sub-Saharan Africa. Northern, round the western, through Central Africa. and it's usually common between December and June of each year. All right, my dear learners, let us now look at the symptoms when one has meningitis. What are some of the symptoms? Now, the symptoms has to do with A, fever. We're likely to get fever. B, we're likely to get headache. You experience headache, profuse one. And then C, the most likely effects is neck stiffness. Your neck becomes stiff. So those are some of the symptoms of the disease. Other symptoms like vomiting, confusion, epilepsy, etc. are signs that show that one has meningitis. It is a deadly disease and must be, carefully, studied and should be avoided. Avoid overcrowding places. So that leads us to prevention of meningitis. There's a spelling mistake here. It's meningitis. All right. Then we have A, immunization. By immunization, we mean it's a way of increasing the body's immunity against any possible attack by any of the microorganisms that causes meningitis. And it is done by introducing what we call vaccine. Vaccines are dead viruses or dead bacteria that are introduced into the body, and they will cause the body immune system to become self-aware and become very active to destroy any invading bacteria, viruses, protozoa, or fungus that can lead to meningitis. That's immunization. B, use of antibiotics. Antibiotics is taken from the word against, or means against bacteria. So these are the use of certain chemicals that help to fight or destroy or kill the bacteria as soon as they try invading the system. And C, avoid personal contact with infected persons. That is very important. All right, my dear learners, this is what time will have us. Today we touch on meningitis as one of the dangerous or infectious diseases of humans because it affects the brain and spinal cord in most cases. It has another name called cerebrospinal meningitis. It manifests itself in several symptoms like fever, headache, neck stiffness. I also said it is caused by virus, bacterium, fungus, and protozoa. Ways of prevention, we said through immunization, use of antibiotics, and avoid personal contact. All right. Why don't you discuss what you have learned with your daddy, mommy, or your sibling to show you have really understood the lesson? All right. For our assignment, the last one before our exam next week, describe the term meningitis. 2, what is the full meaning of CSM, which was mentioned in the lesson? Then 3, mention 4 causes of meningitis, 2 symptoms of meningitis, and 2 preventions of meningitis. All right. Till we meet again, it's bye.